All right, take your Bibles out to Genesis chapter 7, and we're going to pick it up around verse number 10. I think that's where we left off. And that's a really great place to start because I don't really have to go back and review anything because verses 11 through 16 are a review of the previous 5 or 6 or 10 verses. So we're going to pick it up in Genesis chapter number 7, verse number 10. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were open. All right, so we did this last week, but when you compare 7:11 there with 8:13, you find out that they're in the ark for a total of about 11 months. They go in the 2nd month at the 17th day, and you see in chapter 8 that they come out basically at the 1st month of the following year, the 601st year of Noah's life. All right, so we looked at that already. And I'll just say this, though. That's a long time to be shut up in any type of structure with a whole farm and a zoo at the same time. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on here. But I want to point your attention to a couple things at the end of verse 11. It says, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Now, we know the windows of heaven are above us. Okay, in fact, in Malachi chapter 3, when talking about tithing, it says that, I'll open up the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing on you, of which you're not even able to receive. We also studied the great deep, and we know that the great deep is above us as well. It's a huge body of water above the universe. And so I think what you're seeing here, but it could also potentially apply to literally fountains underneath the oceans where water comes up from below. In fact, that still happens out in, what's the name of that Old Faithful, right? The geyser, right? And so we got to remember this flood is absolutely destroying the earth. This is a cataclysmic event. And as we go through here, I'll make points or maybe some illustrations of a couple things that I think is possible that are going on here. There are creation scientists, and I got to caution, I think creation science is a great thing to study. But I do want to caution you about one thing. Creation isn't scientific. Why? Yeah, it's a miracle. Right? The creation is supernatural. So when we talk about creation science, what we're talking about is a worldview of viewing empirical scientific data and evidence through the worldview of the Scripture is the truth. Right? And so when we look at the mountains and we look at the oceans and we look at creation, we know that it happened as God said it. And as you look at scientific data through the lens of the Bible, you find out that science doesn't contradict the Bible at all. And, when someone comes and looks at that same evidence and comes to the conclusion that this was the result of natural processes over billions and billions and billions of years without any supernatural cause, they're coming to that conclusion because they're interpreting that same data that you're looking at through a different worldview. Understand? Well, there are creation scientists. I say all that just to give you a little something on creation science there, I guess. But what I'm getting at is that many young Earth creationists teach that the water was literally a canopy that surrounded the Earth, and that canopy dropped down all of its water. Maybe. There's nothing in the Bible that says that, though, right? So the only places I can show you is what we've gone through Genesis so far, is that we know that the exterior dimensions of the universe is frozen water, and that God may have brought that water all the way through the universe supernaturally to Earth. Exactly the same way that he did that with the creation, when he brought all the light from the farthest reaches of the galaxies, the stars and so forth, supernaturally and instantaneously brought it down to Earth in an instant, right? And so I'm not saying there wasn't a canopy. Maybe there was, but that in and of itself is insufficient to explain what's happening right here. All right. Now, look at verse 12. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. What's the number 40 stand for again? We talked about this last week. Testing. Very good. In the selfsame day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them into the ark. Now remember, I told you, this is a recap. Okay, so yes, it already said that, and for whatever reason, the Lord is kind of rehearsing this again as we go through the same account of what we already read last week. Verse 14, they and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. Now, in zoology, the animal kingdom, right, is broken down into subkingdoms, which is broken down into classes, which is broken down into orders, which is broken down into families, which is broken down into genus, which is broken down into species. Now, you all remember that from like 7th grade, right? Yeah, me too. Yeah, right. I don't remember any of that junk. But anyway, kingdom, subkingdom, class, order, family, genus, species. Kind most likely corresponds with family, all right? Because you have families of felines and canines and all this other kind of stuff. I don't know what it is. You don't need every species of every type of animal to be on the ark, because the way God programmed our genes, you have so many dominant and recessive traits in your DNA that when you mate, you can pass on all kinds of different features and characteristics. And over the process of time, as different types of cats breed with different types of cats, you have a diversity of species that tends to emerge, but they're still all cats, right? You see the same thing in the dog families. You see the same thing in, all kinds of animals. I'm definitely not a zoologist, but that's the complexity with which God designed us. And again, I'm not a scientist, but I talked early on in this class many months ago, and I'm going to plug it again here because I just gave it to Brendan the other day, is there is a documentary that you can get on YouTube for free, which is called Is Genesis History? And they talk to all scientists and PhDs from all the different disciplines of science about creation and scientific interpretation of what you see in these various disciplines from a biblical perspective. And there is a zoologist in there that talks about this kind of stuff, and it's amazing. So I really would recommend that you go out there and watch that documentary. I actually watched it again on Monday after I had this conversation with somebody, because it really is very educational, and it will strengthen your faith knowing that what God said he did, he actually did. I mean, the idea that, never mind, we're not getting into evolution. We've done it before. All right, verse 15 and 16. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And they that went in, male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. Now, I kind of touched on that verse number 16 in my message on Sunday, that when you have the Lord shutting him in, you have another representation or picture that salvation is not of your works. It's a gift of God, right? Like by grace through faith. God does the saving. God does the keeping. So God saved you by faith, and God keeps you by faith. That's actually, when you're reading in your New Testament, the book of Romans is really a doctrinal description of what your salvation is. Grace through faith. Galatians goes right with it. And Galatians focuses on not saved by faith, but kept by faith. That you can't lose your salvation. No works to get it, no works to keep it. And so the Lord is the one who brings them in, and the Lord is the one who shuts them in. And that shutting in is a picture of eternal security. All right? Go to John chapter 10. John chapter 10, verse 28. When God shuts that door, I'm not saying that Noah did a bad job making the ark, but it's not his craftsmanship that keeps the water out. You understand what I'm saying? Look at verse number 28, John chapter 10. And I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish. Neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand. My Father, which gave them me, is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are one. Where does salvation come from? It comes from God. Jesus gives it to you. He gives it to you, and he keeps you in there. Now, go to Matthew chapter 25. Because not only does the Lord shut him in, but what's on the other side of the door? He shuts the world out. And when that door shuts, it's too late. And if you look at Matthew chapter 25, you see this with respect to the tribulation, post-tribulation rapture of the Jews, which is being described here in these two stories, or three stories here in Matthew chapter 25. The first one here in verse number 25, look at verse number 1. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins. Those 10 virgins are the Jews. Remember, there's 144,000 Jewish virgins that are evangelizing the world in the tribulation and all that. Well, I don't want to read the whole thing, but skip down to verse number 10. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came. Who's the bridegroom? Jesus Christ, right? We were just talking in Sunday school about marriage, how it's Christ in his church. We're the bride. He's the bridegroom. And when does he come? Post-tribulation rapture to get the Jews. And what you're going to see here is while they went to buy, the bridegroom came. And they were ready. They that were ready went in with him to the marriage. Whose marriage is Jesus? Who's marrying Jesus? We are. So why is he coming to get these Jews? To be witnesses at the wedding. Now, some of them are going to miss it because they went to buy. Well, how do you buy in the tribulation? Take the mark of the beast. So you've got some Jewish believers that couldn't hold out to the end. They took the mark. And when Jesus came, they missed it. You understand? That's what's being pictured here. So this is prophetic stuff that we're reading here. But the thing that I want you to understand is that last phrase right there, the door was shut. Now look what happens. Afterward came also other virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, I know you not. Watch therefore, for ye know neither the day nor the hour where the Son of Man cometh. Well, here's Noah preaching for 120 years. The Lord's coming, the Lord's coming, the judgment's coming, the judgment's coming. And they're in there, they're ready. And the Lord shuts the door. And now, once the door shuts, now the people want to come and get in. And the Lord's like, sorry, you had your chance. Gave you 120 years and a week. I think there's probably, just 4 million-ish time period. 4 million people probably by this point on the world. How many of them did Noah reach? I don't know. And again, I'm not 100% sure that there was exactly that number, but just looking at that number of time and the 4 to 10 million, I don't know. Probably not much more than that, though. Well, think about this, too, right? God didn't spare the children, did he? We're going to get to that in a little bit here. There's no mercy. There's no mercy in this. Yeah. Yeah, and that had a consequence for others, didn't it? So we're going to talk about that very thing in just a second. But I want you to look at Proverbs chapter 1 really quick. This is also a prophetic passage dealing with the second coming of Christ in the tribulation period and all that. But look at Proverbs chapter 1. Now, we read Proverbs, and it's like, instruction for how to be a good king, right? Solomon's writing. He's the king. He's writing to his son, maybe Rehoboam, about, hey, when you become the king, here's the stuff. You're a king. Hello? You're a king. You're kings and priests, the Bible says. You're a royal. Get that? Royalty. Not just Susie. Susie's not the only royalty in here, okay? Royal priesthood. So here's the thing, like men, especially, we're talking to you. We're going to be talking about marriage and our responsibilities in marriage. You're a king in your home. The question is, what kind of king are you? Are you like King David, or are you like King Saul? Right? And so when you read the book of Proverbs, this book tells you how to be a good king, how to be a benevolent king, how to be a loving king, how to be a discerning and a wise king, how to be a holy king and a king and a clean king and a soul-winning king, a fruitful king. A faithful king. All right. So you got to get in the book of Proverbs. All right. But even though we look at this book and we take all this practical wisdom from it, there's a whole lot of prophecy in this book too. And right here in chapter number 1, look at verse number 22. We'll start reading there. It says, "How long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? And the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge." Now again, this is looking doctrinally at the tribulation. Practically, it looks at anybody who is lacking wisdom and not trusting Christ, etc. "Turn you at my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words unto you. Because I have called, and ye refused. I have stretched out my hand, and no man regarded. But ye have set at naught all my counsel, and would none of my reproof." Now, watch the consequence of all that. "I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. When your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind, when distress and anguish cometh upon you. Then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me. For that they hated knowledge, and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They would none of my counsel. They despised all my reproof." See that happening right in the passage here in Genesis? They mocked, they laughed, they wouldn't take God's word, they didn't care what Noah was preaching, they didn't want anything to do with it. But then when calamity came, now they wanted it, and the Lord said, "I'm sorry, son, it's just too late now. You're going to have to reap what you have sown." Same thing's going to be true in the tribulation period. Same thing's going to be true with the rapture of the church. The rapture of the church is not part of the tribulation. But I'll tell you what, there's going to be people, when they see all these Christians disappear, they're going to be deceived and deluded eventually when the Antichrist comes on the scene. But I bet you a lot of them, when they first see it, they're going to know. Oops. See all the books, the Bibles, all the sermons on YouTube, they're still going to be there. There's still going to be a witness after those people left, and they're going to cry out. And I don't know how that delusion works exactly. I think the delusion is ultimately that the Antichrist is Jesus Christ. I'm pretty confident about that one. But I think in those moments after the rapture, they're going to know it was true. I don't know. We'll see. So we need to be witnesses. We need to be witnesses. All right, look at Genesis chapter 7, verse number 17. "And the Lord was 40 days upon the earth." Now try to pay attention to the numbers as we go through here. "The flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bare up the ark, and it was lift up above the earth." So it is raining for 40 days and 40 nights, and it is raining incredibly hard. Look at the very next verse. "And the waters prevailed, and were greatly increased upon the earth, and the ark went up upon the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered." Now, the tallest mountain in the world is Mount, what's it called? Everest. It's just shy, I think, of 30,000 feet above sea level. All right? And look at verse 20. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. So 15 cubits, so 22 to 25 feet above the height of the tallest mountain. So let's just use round numbers. The water from sea level is 30,000 feet high over all the face of the earth. I saw how much that weighs, and it was some insane, like 3.8 to like 10 to the 22nd power tons. Like just an incredible amount of weight. And what's happening underneath the earth, under all that pressure, is it is cracking and crumbling and shifting, and it's just catastrophic event. So while this rain is falling down, and probably the winds are probably stirring, and you have lots of times in the Bible where there's tempests on the sea. One of them is called Euroclydon in Acts chapter 27, and the one that Jonah was in, and and all this kind of stuff. So you probably have tidal waves. You might have volcanic activity bursting up and those geysers and all that kind of stuff. And the topography of the below the waters and on the land is all changing. And like I said, that verse right there, what was it? In verse 20 says the mountains were covered. I'm not dogmatic about this, but I'm pretty confident those mountains are being created or being forged during this cataclysmic event. They're not on the earth beforehand. And that they're evidence of judgment, they're evidence of the destruction of Noah's flood, that the earth is likely very flat. I don't mean flat like a pancake either. It's a globe, okay? But I mean elevation-wise, it's like Nebraska, okay? It's a lot like Western New York. It's pretty flat, all right? That doesn't mean that there's not rolling hills and so forth like that. In fact, those are called out here, all the high hills. High hills are probably like 2,000 feet. It's not even a mountain until it's over 5,000. And so I think the Rockies and the Andes and the Himalayas, all that stuff is probably forged in this time period, but the water's going up high enough to cover all that stuff, all right? In order for that to happen, in order for the water to get 30,000 feet high, it has to rise 6 inches per minute, 31 feet per hour, 750 feet of water per day for 40 days gets you to 30,000 feet. 6 inches a minute. That's nuts. I was reading some of the accounts of the hurricane on Sanibel Island down there and off the coast of Florida, and when the houses were the water was rising and just flooding through here, and it was catastrophic. I mean, it was bad. But you're talking about, 7, 8 feet of water over the course of the entire storm, which lasted hours. This is talking about 6 inches a minute. Probably the people, probably all dead in the first 2 hours. Tops. The whole population of the world. Just like that. All right, look at verse 21. Actually, I want to go back to one thing. Go back to verse 17. It says it bare the ark up and it was lifted above the earth. And I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. This is not a local flood. This is a global catastrophe, a universal flood. And there is evidence of a universal flood all through the world. There are, in all the mountain ranges of the world, there is evidence of sea life, shells, and all kinds of trilobites, and all these other kinds of things scattered across the mountain ranges of the entire world. In fact, in Santa Barbara, California, I think I have something on this here somewhere. Yeah, I do. There is a petrified fish bed of 1 billion dead fish in Santa Barbara, California, all within a 4-mile square radius. It's crazy. There's sea snails and clams in the Himalayan mountains. How do you account for that? Everything died except for those 8 people. Look at verse 22. All in whose nostrils was the breath of life, and of all that was in the dry land died. Now that is a sad day for God's creation. There is no mercy. Man probably never thought that God would actually do it. They were mocking at Noah's preaching. They mocked at God's prophets, and then when the judgment struck, it was too late. And what you saw in Proverbs Chapter 1 gives you a pretty good indication of what it would have been like in those first couple hours after the flood, before all their lives were snuffed out. Now 23. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Now, 150 days is 5 lunar months, okay? So 30-day months, 5 of them, 150 days, because of a global flood that was a result of man's sinful hearts. Now, I told you to pay attention to the days, and as we get here through the first few verses of chapter 8, you'll see why. Because we're going to start talking about the water goes up, the water goes down, where the thing settles and everything. Is there any questions about anything that we just saw in chapter 7, though, before we go on? All right, look at chapter 8, verse 1. And God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. Now, you see that phrase right there, God remembered Noah? That does not in any way infer that God ever forgot Noah. We looking for the prayer list? All right, everybody got that, right? All right, good. It's another one of those anthropomorphic expressions. Remember I said that word is like when God takes on human characteristics like God's hands, God's eyes, and different things like that to help us understand what God is doing. This is another one of those. It relates God's attributes to human attributes. So God remembering Noah shows that God has a special care and concern for Noah and those people that are in the ark. Doesn't mean that he forgot them for a few months. All right. The same phrase is used in Genesis chapter 19, verse number 29, in regard to Abraham. And the Bible often tells us to remember God. In fact, I'd like you to go and look at Ecclesiastes chapter number 12. Ecclesiastes is the book right after Proverbs. Ecclesiastes chapter number 12, verse 1. All right, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse number 1. Remember now. Oh, I still hear everybody turning. That's okay. Keep going. I'll wait. Sorry. See, I had a head start. I knew where to go. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, look at verse number 1. Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh. But when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. We're called many times in the Bible to remember the Lord and the thing that the Lord has told us. The problem today is not that God's not interested in remembering man, it's that we forget him so easily. In fact, when you look at 2 Peter as an example, go to 2 Peter. The word remember or remembrance is really one of the key words of the book of 2 Peter. Peter's main emphasis in this book to some extent is to remind the Christians of what God had said. All right, so in 2 Peter chapter 1, look at verse number 12. It says, wherefore I will not be negligent to put you always in remembrance of these things, though ye know them, and be established in the present truth. Have you ever sat in church when I'm teaching Sunday school or Wednesday or Sunday or Pastor Swatter is preaching or teaching something and you're like, yeah, I've heard all this before. Yeah, but you don't remember it until someone says it again. You know what I mean? I have forgotten more Bible in my life than I probably know right now standing here. And that's really frustrating to me. I'm serious about that. We need to be reminded. Look at the very next verse. Look at verse 13. Yea, I think it meet, as long as I am in this tabernacle, to stir you up by putting you in remembrance. That says, I think it's appropriate, as long as I'm in this body, I'm going to keep reminding you about the stuff that you know. See, a lot of times the thing is like, when you come to Bible study or whatever, you kind of always want to learn something new. But sometimes the thing that's needful is to be reminded about the thing that we once learned, but we've abandoned or forgot about or haven't put into practice in our lives yet. And so we need that repetition, you know. You always need it. And I try to, even my own son, Matthew, he plays on a soccer team or whatever, and he thinks that like it's a waste of time to practice the fundamentals. He's like, well, Dad, I already know how to do that. I was like, then how come the professionals still practice it? You know, like professional baseball players, they still hit off a tee every single day. Same thing they were doing when they first learned t-ball when they were 4 years old. And I'm like, well, Matthew, why does Aaron Judge still hit off a tee every day? He just set the home run record the other night, and he still hits off a tee. So stop thinking you're better than everybody, right? You always have to go back to the fundamentals and the basics of Christianity because we have to master those things. And let's be honest, we never really master anything in the Christian life. None of us ever masters being a perfect witness all the time. No one ever masters being a perfect husband all the time. No one ever masters being faithful to our devotion time and prayer time every day. We always have to be reminded about the importance of the fundamentals because you can't build a beautiful house on a weak foundation. You just can't. All right, look at verse 15, same chapter. Moreover, I will endeavor that ye may be able after my decease to have these things always in remembrance. I'm going to remind you and remind you and remind you so that you still remember them after I'm dead. All right, look at chapter 3, 2 Peter chapter 3, verse number 1. This second epistle, beloved, I now write unto you in both which I stir up your pure minds by way of remembrance. You want to keep your mind clean? Remember the things that God's taught you. Keep going back to it. All right, Genesis. Go back to Genesis. All right, Genesis chapter 8, verse 1. God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark, and God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. So one of the things that God does to accelerate the removal of the water through evaporation is he sends a wind to pass over the earth. And that's obvious. When you go into a restroom, and you wash your hands, and you go to grab a paper towel, and there is no paper towels in the restroom. What do they got instead? Put your hands under the little sensor, and what happens? The hand dryer blows the air, and what does the air do? Dries your hands, right? You hang your clothes on a line outside to dry, and if it's a breezy day, they're going to dry faster than if it's not a breezy day. You know, ladies, you got a hair. I shouldn't even just say ladies, but I don't know anything about hair, so I don't have any. So, ladies, you got a hair dryer? Help blow your hair. Dry your hair, I guess. Again, I don't know anything about these kinds of things, as you can tell. But wind, moving air, helps things dry. And so God sends this wind to help get things going. Look at verse 2. The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from the heaven was restrained. Now, obviously, verse 2, chronologically, happens before verse 1, because that verse 2 would have happened at the end of the 40 days and 40 nights, okay? That's when the rain stopped. But he sends the wind, obviously, after the rain has stopped, all right? So you might even have about a 9-month difference. I'm not really sure. Look at verse 3. And the waters returned from off the earth continually, and after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. So there were 40 days and 40 nights of rain. Then it takes 150 days for the water level to come down from about 30,000 feet to about half that distance. Now I say half that distance, or half that height or elevation, because look at verse 4. And the ark rested in the 7th month. That's your 150 days, the 17th day of the month. Remember, the rain started on the 2nd month, 17th day. 150 days, 5 months. You got me? And it comes to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. Now, the Mountains of Ararat is a mountain range that most people think is in northeastern Turkey, kind of up near the border of, I think it's Armenia now, but it used to be part of the Soviet Union. And that's a region of the world where Turkey, Iraq, Iran are all kind of there. And so that mountain range probably extends into Iran a little bit too. But Mount Ararat is the name of one of those mountains. And I forget the exact number, so I'm just going to say it's between 15 and 17,000 feet. So if it comes to rest somewhere up on Mount Ararat, even though it says in the Mountains of Ararat, so I'm not sure it's actually that mountain, but it's in that vicinity. It's potentially about 15,000 feet high when it comes to rest on that mountain. All right? So you've got 150 days. You got 40 days, and then another, 150 minus 40? 110. So you got 40 days of rain, then you got 110 days till this day when the ark hits rock. Okay? But the water's not gone yet. It's still got another 15,000 feet to go. So it's about halfway evaporated at this point. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the ark rested in the mountains of Ararat. This is another proof that this is a global flood. Now, I know I don't need to convince you that it's a global flood. You believe it. But a lot of the liberal Christians and theologians and secular people believe, well, these religious books, because the Quran talks about this, the Jews believe it, Christians believe it. They say, well, no, this is probably some big flood, but local flood. Well, no. Because if you're in a local flood, as the water begins to drain, just like a bathtub, my kids play in the bathtub with little toys and stuff, right? And so they have a little boat in there with some little disciples. It's kind of cool. Guess what happens when you pull the plug? The boat starts going down towards the drain, right? Well, if the water's all running down into the oceans and stuff, then where's Noah's Ark eventually going to end up? In the ocean. It doesn't end up in the ocean. It ends up on the top of a 15,000-foot high mountain. That's not a local flood, folks. It's that water at that height. It's not draining anywhere. It's evaporating uniformly off the earth, and it's all coming down until it just happens to be over a mountain, and that's where it stops. Now, it doesn't just happen to be over a mountain. We'll get into that when he comes off the ark in chapter 9, and we'll show you the significance of some of that. This is where you get the phrase high and dry, because he's up on top of a mountain, and he's not going anywhere for a while. All right, now Ararat. The word Ararat means creation or holy land. Now that's interesting, because the word creation, when God creates the earth, he gives Adam, a command: go forth, be fruitful, multiply. Well, that's exactly what he's going to tell Noah. So this isn't a recreation necessarily, but it's related to it, because they're going to go and repopulate the earth. Now, this mountain, like I said, is in a range known as Ararat. And in this range, there's two high volcanic summits known as Big Ararat and Little Ararat in a restricted military zone in Turkey near the former Soviet Union. The Persians used to call this area the Mountain of Noah, or Kakanoa. Probably not pronouncing that right. I definitely don't speak Persian. The glacial cap on the top of this mountain, where people have had people claim to see the ark, is 200 feet thick and covers 22 square miles. There's been many sightings of the ark, but again, we're Bible believers. I believe in Noah's ark because the Bible says it. So whether they ever find the thing or not, I don't really care, right? But that said, I'm going to read you some historical witnesses that have said there's an ark up there. St. Thomas of Antioch in 180 AD, all right, so about 150 years after the death of Christ, wrote this, quote, "Of the ark, the remains are to this day to be seen in the Arabian mountains." One of the church fathers from the 4th century, a man named Chrysostom, said in a sermon, quote, "Do not the mountains of Armenia testify to," and then in brackets I put the flood, end brackets, "where ark rested, and are not the remains of the ark preserved there unto this very day for our admonition?" Another church father, Epiphanius of Salemos, lived 315 to 403 AD, wrote, quote, "Do you seriously suppose that we are unable to prove our point, when even to this day the remains of Noah's ark are shown in the mountain of the country of the Kurds?" There's also about 1,000 years later, there's an Armenian prince named Johannes Hathan. He lived 1250 AD, or he wrote this between 1250 and 1254 AD. It says, "In Armenia, there is a very tall mountain, and its name is Ararat. On that mountain, Noah's ark landed after a flood. At the summit, a great black object is always visible, which is said to be the Ark of Noah." Ever hear of this guy? Marco Polo wrote, "You should know that in the land of Armenia, the Ark of Noah still rests on top of a certain great mountain, where the snow stays so long no one can climb it. The snow never melts, gets thicker with each passing snowfall." A Russian aviator in 1960 named Vladimir Ryskovsky and Hardwick Knight, a New Zealander, in 1936, both took images of what may be the ark from their airplanes, with rectangular timbers on the mountain. In 1952, a helicopter pilot named George Jefferson Green saw a portion of the ark exposed in Ararat's northeast face. In 1955, Ferdinand Navarar, an authority on Turkish archaeology, was the first man in modern times to discover the ark and bring back a piece of wood to be scientifically tested. 200 people involved in 23 sightings since 1856 of Noah's Ark in Mount Ararat. And if you go out on YouTube and just Google or look up Noah's Ark, you can see the Turkish government, as recently as 4 years ago, showing drone footage of locations on Mount Ararat where they think they may have found the lower half of the hull kind of buried up there on one of those mountains. Now, is it real? I have no idea. And I don't need it to be real to believe it, because I believe the Bible. But it's stinking cool. All right? It's kind of neat. Now, again, all that stuff could be frauds. I don't know. But like I said, that's not why I believe it. But what's interesting is there's about 2 billion Muslims on the planet. There's Christians, there's Jews, and they all believe it. Even the Quran talks about it. Not that I'm saying that gives it authority or anything, but I'm just saying. There's actually probably more people on the earth. Well, maybe not. There's a lot of people on the earth that are atheists in like China and everything. But there's a lot of people on the earth that believe that this is actual true history. And you know what? They're right. Yeah. Yeah. What's he say? Yeah, you can find a lot of that stuff on YouTube. The Ron Wyatt expeditions are actually documented on there, and I've not really looked into that stuff myself, but like I said, I know it's out there, and you can definitely go check it out. So yeah, so Brother Hoffman put some notes. Is that one of the notes right in Genesis chapter 8 in his study Bible? So for those of you that have one of those study Bibles, uh, cool. Cool. Very good. All right. Well, we'll stop right there, and we'll pick it up in verse number 5.